So I want to take a few minutes and talk about the prevalence rates in our profession. I know I mentioned 1 in 3. I want to break it down. I have 3 studies I want to briefly talk about. I know in the PowerPoint and some of the information is, I have some of the information in there. 3 studies were done. I'm going to talk about the first 2 studies because they led to the creation of the National Task Force on Well-Being. And so the first study was conducted by the American Bar Association, Hazelton, Betty Ford, and Patrick Krill. And that was in 2016. The results were released. 12,825 active practicing attorneys participated in the study, and the results were astounding, shocking, stunning. And I'm also, side note here, footnote, these were self-reported, and I will admit I did participate in this study, so I did not help the numbers, but these are self-reported. So what does that mean? In my opinion, these are highly underreported because, again, 5 arrests in, and I absolutely, unequivocally did not believe I had a drug problem. So when somebody says screens positive for depression, that's probably because they've been diagnosed by a medical professional. So with that being said, I took almost 13,000 people participated, attorneys participated in this study, 19 states, and these were the results. 28% screen positive for depressive symptoms. 28%. Compare that to the general population, 7 to 9%. How about major depression? 20% screen positive for major depression versus 7 to 9% of the general population. I want to talk about major depression for a moment. As I mentioned, major depression leads to suicides. We had several big law suicides. Many of them were in the media, in the headlines. And depression, 80% of the time, major depression is treatable if help is sought. When it is not sought, if you have a major depressive episode and you do not receive assistance for it, 50% chance of having another episode. If you have a second episode and do not receive assistance, 70% chance of having a third. If you have a third and don't receive assistance, 90% chance of having a fourth. Chronic, progressive, fatal. People are dying because they are not willing to reach out for help. It is not necessary. If you see somebody struggling, as a human being, you have an obligation to reach out for help for them. Recently, it was brought to my attention, I read a letter written, it was called Letter from Your Depression. You can Google it, you can find it. There's different versions on the internet. And you read the letter and you can feel the heaviness and the weight of major depression. And when I read that letter, now while I absolutely have a substance use disorder that's actively in recovery, I did not struggle with depression or major depression. When I read that letter, I felt the absolute heaviness that depression has upon a person. That person who is struggling with major depression, and I'm saying this because we all work with people, is unable to physically pick up a phone and call and ask for help. So if you notice somebody, and there are so many slides in this presentation, I will not get to them, please go through them, and you notice anything, whether it's just they're a little not dressed as well as they normally are, they're late, they're not showing up on time for meetings, they make plans and don't show, they cancel, they communicate only by text, and they're in the office next to you. These are small signs that literally when you start a conversation, you may actually be able to save somebody's life. If we saw somebody drowning, you wouldn't look and say, hey, don't really want to get involved. No, you're a human being, you would help them. Our profession, we need to help each other. Self-regulating, we need to help each other. So that's major depression. Problematic alcohol use, 21% screen positive for problematic alcohol use versus 12% of other highly skilled professions. Stress, 23%. Anxiety, 19%. There was a question about suicide. How many people have thought about suicide in their career? 12% active practicing attorneys in the 19 states screened positive and said, I've thought about suicide at some point in my career. This is our career. We have an obligation to look out for each other. We have, at least as far as the data about 6 months ago, the 4th highest rate of suicide of any profession, behind doctors, dentists, and pharmacists. I know veterinarians are also up there, but our profession is is really struggling at this time.